Hello and welcome to this virtual event hosted by the Digital Future Society to launch their new book, Faster Than the Future, Facing the Digital Age. It's a book that takes on some of the big challenges that society faces as a result of rapid change at the hands of the digital revolution. The book covers themes ranging from the future of work to the ethics around artificial intelligence and the implications of big data for society. Digital Future Society has gathered 10 journalists from international media, as well as 10 academics from leading institutions with a focus on technology and its impact on society. Each academic has been paired with a journalist to deliver 10 articles taking on some of the most complicated intersections between technology and society, and delivering those articles in an easily accessible style. So let's kick off today's event, and I'm thrilled to give the floor to Christina Collum, the director of the Digital Future Society. Christina?
Thank you, Tim. Thank you. Good morning to all, and on behalf of Digital Future Society, I would like to welcome you here to this virtual session, attending the launch of the book, Faster Than the Future, Facing the Digital Age. We are honored to count with the Secretary of State for Digitalization and Artificial Intelligence of the Spanish government, Carme Artigas, who has not only committed to this book, but also to flourish Digital Future Society. Carme, welcome, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Good morning. Good morning to everyone. It is a very great pleasure to open this event and to present the book Faster Than Future, Facing the Digital Age. A book that is the result of a collaboration between the government of Spain, especially the Secretary of State of Digitalization and AI, and together with the Digital Future Society and the Mobile World Capital Foundation, Barcelona. And this is extraordinary work to promote valuable and comprehensive knowledge in such an important matter as digital transformation. First of all, I want to thank very much to the 10 journalists for international media and to the 10 renowned experts and academics specialized in technology and social impact for their thorough work and collaboration in this project. The result for me is in a must-read book, a book composed of 10 articles to reflect on some of the great social and economic challenges of this digital revolution. We are presenting today this book to shed some light on the challenges and opportunity that the eruption of this new digital era means to our society. And we review the most outstanding aspects of this process for digital transformation and disruptive technologies that are leading innovation. And we study and reflect also about the possibilities and opportunity that technology offers for the construction of a better and more advanced society. In essence, reading the book, you see that there are many uncertainties and no threats to come. However, there are also new opportunities that we must face with a clear priority, placing people at the core of this technology revolution. One of the most important aspects of this book is that it includes an ethical perspective. We must value aspects derived from technological development, from an ethical and human-centered vision, and respect for citizens' rights and the European values. This is why I'm so proud also to share here the fact that we from the Secretary of State and also with the support of the Digital Future Society, I am really pushing for a spine charter of the digital rights, and something that will also come into light in a future event we will organize together. So we're absolutely committed for this human-centered vision of the technological progress. Among other things, it is also the way to guarantee to remove the barriers of access for the most vulnerable population and the benefits of the technology development, to offer new horizons to people who saw technology as something distant, inaccessible, or even harmful. Ultimately, facing social challenges derived from technology and including this ethical vision is, for me, the best way to guarantee the success of digital transformation and the acceptance of society of those challenges. This book therefore covers areas as complex as cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, privacy of the internet, digital rights, as I mentioned, or fake news. And it tries to answer very transcendental questions. Which is the role of humans in digital society? Is data the most valuable asset of the 21st century? Which is its value? Can we monetize that? How to use digitalization to build a more sustainable and smart growth? Which new policies or governance frameworks do we need to establish? So we are facing challenges, very complex world. I say that complex questions require complex answers. And the best way to find complex answers is by putting together different intelligence, different mindset, and a holistic view. So we're facing these challenges, which are derived from technology, from digitalization, and we as governments have the responsibility to address these challenges to guarantee that these transformations are materialized with a human-centered vision and leaving no one behind. We also have an unprecedented opportunity to build a more sustainable, inclusive, digital, and greener world. Let me conclude just thanking again to the Mobile World Capital Foundation, to the Digital Future Society, with the support also of the Vice President of the Ministry of Economic and Digital Transformation, and all the journalists and academics that have collaborated with this book. This book for me is a must-read book, a pillow book of any decision maker and policymaker, and a fundamental exercise to reflect about digital transformation from multiple perspectives. The future is already here, but it's not yet written. We write it every day without single decisions. The challenges are exciting, and collaboration is the best way to face it and to make our lives better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary of State. I like the sentence, the future is not written. Let's shape it in a way that all citizens are involved in it. Thank you again, Carme Artigas, for offering your vision. At Digital Future Society, we analyze, we identify different types of challenges that are stemming from what we call the fourth industrial revolution. Those challenges can be ethical, that can be economical, social, or even environmental challenges. And we need to address them in order to build a more inclusive, a more sustainable, and a more digital agenda in the next years where everybody is inside, everybody is involved. Both the Mobile World Capital Foundation and the Spanish government made a sound commitment around 3 years ago, setting the Digital Future Society. And the goal actually was crystal clear. We wanted to foster a more equitable, a more inclusive, and a more sustainable digital agenda without leaving anyone behind. Thanks to an extraordinary team, but also the sound support of the two institutions, Digital Future Society has become today the meeting point that converges, that gathers, and that connects for forward thinkers and experts representing all sectors present today in the society at a global scale. And actually, a great example of the way we work is precisely what we have done with the book that we are launching today. Faster Than the Future, Facing the Digital Age brings together 10 renowned experts specialized on the impact, the social, the economic, the ethical impact of those great digital transformations. We pair them with 10 specialized journalists with an international background. The book reviews in those chapters all these challenges that bring an equal development and implementation of the technological revolution. And actually, it also reflects how to modulate the impact of the digital age in a controlled and proportionate way. We are delighted to have, let me, before I go forward, let me please provide the names of all the experts on the book as a public and open recognition, not only about their effort, but also because with their work, what it has showcased is the need to progress on this digital humanism. We are actually delighted to have some of the authors today, as it is the case with Joanna Bryson, who has worked in tandem with Martin Eisenlauer in an article where they cover artificial intelligence and ethics. I'm not going to spoil anything of the book. You really need to read it. But let me just mention a question they have already in the subheading of the article. How will technology change our society, and what do we have to do to preserve our ability to choose the future that will benefit us all? Jeremias Adams-Prassel and Tim Wallace reflect upon the gig economy phenomenon. This is a phenomenon that is not really new. It's only that the way it's coming, it's absolutely radical, and it's changing industries nearly overnight. We will also have with us today Matteo Valero and Robin Wouters, who will place us on the stage of the risky competition that countries are facing to reach the top of supercomputing. Mariana Mazzucato, along with Rainer Kattel and Parminder Bara, illustrate us about digital feudalism and how digital platforms, algorithms, and big data could be used to improve people's well-being. Another tandem is Virginia Dignum and Benny Moles, that they explore the role of human beings in this digital society. Carlota Perez and Andres Scheffer reflect on how the pandemic can open the door to smart, equitable, and sustainable global growth. Furthermore, the massive use of our data and the digital Cold War are concepts addressed by the tandem Natasha De Terán and Federico Guerini. The concept of post-truth is explained by Aurélie Filippetti and Christian Salmon. Surveillance in our society is analyzed by Jennifer Kite-Powell and Marike Rosen, and the evolution of cities linked to the expansion of autonomous vehicles is exposed by Raúl Rojas and René Millman in the last article of the book. The volume culminates with the prefaces of the Secretary of State for Digitalization and Artificial Intelligence, Carme Artigas, and the CEO of Mobile World Capital Barcelona Foundation, Carlos Grau, to whom we don't only thank them for their commitment to the book, but more than that, to the commitment they have for digital future society. Faster than the future, facing the digital age also comes at an exceptional moment. The pandemic has underlined the existing global vulnerability, raising challenges in terms of social justice, equality, and sustainability. It is true that these problems already existed before the pandemics, but now they have become even more evident. The book we present today reflects the current social complexity of the challenges, but also the opportunities derived from digitalization, from digital transformation. One of the premises set by the authors stand out especially: the need for a greater application of ethics in technology. And not only in the development of technology, but more than that, especially in the design of technology. And when we talk about ethics, we need to talk about transparency and impartiality and diversity and responsibility and accountability. All those principles need to prevail, as I said, not only in the implementation, but especially in the design of technology. Let's hear about the authors. They are quite more interesting. They will discuss about this and much more during the sessions today. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy first the session, but more than that, the reading afterwards. So with that, I close it, and I give the floor back to Tim. Thank you very much. Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christina. So yes, many thanks to Christina and of course to Carme Artigas for her address. And we're going to start our first panel discussion today, and we're joined by Joanna Bryson, Professor of Ethics and Technology at Hertie School, Germany. She's a leading expert in artificial intelligence and ethics. And she's joined by Jeremias Adams-Prassel, Professor of Law at Magdalen College of the University of Oxford and Deputy Director of the Law Faculty's Institute of European and Comparative Law. Now, both of these speakers we've got with us today are co-authors of chapters in this book, both on different topics, which might seem to be quite separate: artificial intelligence and gig economy platforms. But I think we'll find that they actually have quite a lot of crossover. So I'm going to start by asking both of the speakers to quickly summarize their chapters, and I'm going to start with Joanna.
Okay. Well, first, thanks for having us. It's fantastic to see the investment that Serena is making in this effort. So my chapter was titled, in fact, Artificial Intelligence and Ethics. And it wasn't just mine, our chapter. And it started actually from the perspective of fiction, science fiction, of course, but then moves very quickly into fact. So what is artificial intelligence? What is technology really? And then we talk about anthropomorphism, the extent to which people think that when you say technology is intelligent, that suddenly they're dealing with another kind of person. In fact, it's not. The digital is one of the means by which we are changing our society, but the ethics of technology is not the ethics of technology itself. It's about how does technology alter the way we treat each other and what we can do and what we should do given our new capacities. So we went into that for a while, and then we go directly into a very immediate, real, tangible version of that, which is legal liability. And then after talking about liability, we actually briefly talk about the military applications. That's just sort of a little box, but it's still, it was an interesting whirlwind because, to be honest, me and my co-author did not see everything the same way. So I was one of the people drawing us towards the human-centered approach.
Brilliant. And over to Jeremiah for a quick sum up of what you wrote for the book.
Thank you, Tim. Yes, indeed, that's my chapter on the gig economy, which I wrote together with Tim Wallace of the London Telegraph. And really what we do in our chapter is we explore competing narratives about the gig economy. So when we're confronted with the gig economy, to some, it's this harbinger of the future of work, where we're all individual entrepreneurs on the platforms, on the apps. To others, it's a terrible way of digital exploitation. Well, what ends up happening is we take jobs, we chop them down into little tasks, and then individuals end up essentially as piece workers, constantly controlled and surveyed by an algorithm. And one thing I think that's a really important message from this is a lot of sort of labor market trends we start seeing in the gig economy are quickly coming to workplaces across the socioeconomic spectrum. So in particular, and I think that's where I'm really looking forward to some of the discussion with you and Joanna this morning, one particularly interesting aspect that comes out of the gig economy is the rise of what I call algorithmic management. So this is the idea that despite all the talk we've had about robots coming for our jobs, in reality, what's happening is that robots are coming for our managers' jobs. And you might think, at first instance, that's brilliant. You know, don't like my manager. Why not get rid of her and have a robot instead doing it? But actually, what's happening is that it's got a huge impact on work equality. And so I think thinking forward, thinking about regulation, thinking about transparency, a lot of these different challenges of artificial intelligence, for all of us, those will become extremely burning questions when it comes to thinking about the future of work. Because what's changing, and OECD statistics and various other labor market surveys show this very clearly at the moment, what's changing is not the quantity of jobs, it's the quality of jobs we really have to think about.
Yeah, well, I'll come back to Joanna because you mentioned the theme of transparency and regulation. And Joanna, you mentioned in your opening address about how there's quite a lot of anxiety around artificial intelligence and people seeing that robots are taking their jobs and that it's kind of a wild west for a new wave of intelligent machines to wreak havoc. Can you just tell me about how you see transparency as being key to regulation?
Right, okay, well, thanks for the question. Robots don't take jobs. Robots are built, and so people use them sometimes to automate parts of business processes. But it isn't that that suddenly a machine has made up its mind to come and it wants to walk dogs or something. That just doesn't happen. So the idea of transparency is to understand when someone has done something with a machine. Did they do it for the right purpose? Did they do it legally? Do they understand? Did they put tests in place to check and make sure that it couldn't exceed what were expected problems? Of course, sometimes we have unexpected consequences of our actions, so we can't anticipate everything. But even then, we can go back and say, "Oh, that didn't work so well. Let's put in some more rules about best practice." So transparency is about being able to see why things happened. And some people think that means you can't do it with AI because AI is inscrutable. There's billions of weights. What are they doing? But what we argue is that in fact, what matters is how people trained those billions of weights, and did they follow good practice? Because we can only hold each other accountable. We cannot hold machines accountable. So transparency is the means by which we hold each other accountable and keep our societies together. And that's the thing we need to focus on.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to come back to the role of artificial intelligence and algorithms in terms of the gig economy in a minute, Jeremiah. But given that your chapter, as you say, is titled Competing Narratives, there is this huge kind of battle of ideology between big tech platforms and those on the side of unions and labor rights about how these new jobs of the modern economy should be regulated. Should those platform workers be given rights that have been kind of built up over years and years, like holiday pay, social security? So how do you see those competing narratives, and where do you predict things going?
Thank you, Tim. I think one of the reasons why the narratives are so prevalent is that they drive legal regulatory outcomes, right? If we believe that the gig economy is this brand new, novel, innovative thing, then the last thing we would want is for the law to stand in its way. If, on the other hand, you believe that the gig economy is sort of evil medieval exploitation, well, then the prescription is probably to ban it. Now, I think, and this is sort of very much what Tim and I also argue in the chapter, and what I've argued in my previous book, Humans as a Service, is that actually the truth lies very much in the middle. And that has a really important implication for regulation. And that is, we have to be very calm when we look at a new phenomenon and don't get sort of bamboozled by the technology, right? When you look at the underlying business model of the gig economy, it's not fundamentally distinct from what else is going on in the labor market. A lot of the underlying trends, the breaking down of jobs into tasks, the outsourcing of particular tasks, the fragmentation of the workplace, that is not a new phenomenon that came with technology. Technology plays a really cool and clever role in the gig economy platforms, making them matching faster, providing feedback systems. But it doesn't fundamentally change the underlying organization of the labor market in terms of its challenges, but also in terms of its advantages. And so as a result of that, I think when it comes to regulation, we have to be very, very careful that we don't fall into some sort of trap of saying, we need a new law for the gig economy. We need specific regulation for gig economy, because it's not that sort of separate silo. Instead, what I think it really comes down to is that we need to see enforcement. We need to see the application of existing norms, which obviously has huge benefits for workers and stops exploitation. But also it's really important in terms of regulating the labor market overall. Because otherwise, what you end up seeing is that certain actors, essentially simply by refusing to play by the rules, end up skewing the playing field and leaving all of us worse off. And so it's not surprising, I think, that when you look at Supreme Courts across the European Union at the moment, whether it was the Conseil d'Etat in Paris recently, whether it was the Court of Appeal here in London, or indeed the Spanish Supreme Court in the global ruling just a couple of weeks ago, what courts around the world are increasingly agreeing with is precisely what I've just suggested. This is work. It's tightly controlled, whether by an algorithm or a traditional boss. And therefore, you cannot simply stick a fancy new label on it and avoid responsibility.
Yeah, and you're right that many of the heads of these companies cite that regulators haven't caught up with technology, and perhaps there is a sort of gap there between the reality and their narrative. But one area of this new economy that is certainly new to a degree and not unique to the platform gig economy is the idea of algorithmic management and algorithmic dismissal. So I'm going to come back to Joanna now to ask about how the ethics of those algorithmic management decisions could be or should be regulated. What is the future of being fired by an algorithm?
Right. Well, again, it's not the algorithm. This is where it depends on decides. There's a set of actions that you can set up, and you can say that someone gets fired as soon as they're caught smoking pot on the job or something, right? You make a rule. And then you have some machine perhaps detecting that they're smoking pot. I don't know how I chose that example, but the point is, did the machine decide to fire them? Well, it might have decided that it looked like they were smoking. You could then, you have a choice about how you set up your decision-making about whether you go then and check again with a human, go and do more investigations and just use the machine to flag it up, or you decide to just dismiss everyone that this machine has flagged, right? So the point is that a machine is a component of the process, and you can blame it if you want. You could say, oh, computer says no, and you can leave it at that. or you could have a more responsible organization, which is going to do a better job of capturing, and retaining your human capital. So what we've actually seen, there's some interesting studies that have been done in Germany, that the companies who are using more artificial intelligence and are changing jobs and removing some human jobs, they mostly retain the majority of their workforce and give them better jobs. There are some people they let go, but it's more like 20 or 30%. It's not like all the people who left that job. They capture the best people and move them up. So, so that is a decision about how brittle or fragile it is. And that's why I think it's very important not to have this narrative that AI is another person. You need to say, who is the person that made that choice about whether we went and talked to the employee and decided whether it was a legitimate decision, or we just did the easy thing and used the machine to basically flip a coin and decide who to fire.
Yeah, and I think that's a crucial distinction to make, isn't it? That if algorithmic dismissal is happening, someone designed that algorithm and the process that the algorithm took. Right. Jeremiah, I'm going to...
But it's both the design of the algorithm itself has been done by humans, that they've chosen how to do that, and the decision about how that fits into the business process. And
absolutely. And I want to come back to Jeremiah on how that has been implemented in the gig economy, because there have been legal cases in Europe about summary dismissal by algorithms. So Jeremiah, could you just expand a bit on how that area of algorithmic management applies to platform work?
Well, from a legal perspective, I've got some good news for you when it comes to concerns about algorithm dismissal. It's very straightforward. They're illegal. So the GDPR, which we all hate for having to click away the little cookie buttons, has very important Article 22. Article 22 of the General Data Protection Regulation forbids the automation of decisions that have legally binding consequences. So the termination of a contract of employment on a purely automated basis would actually be illegal under Article 22 of the GDPR. And so that raises a really interesting question, the kind of scenario we see from the United States, for example, where you just try and log on to your app one day and your account simply no longer works, or you get an email telling you that you no longer have to turn up to your job. That is something that we couldn't see in the European legal space at the moment. And I think what Article 22 of the GDPR then raises, and again, this ties in very much in the message that Joanna is giving you that I completely agree with, is there needs to be a space for human agency. And it's really, really important that when it comes to talking about technology, whether it's lawyers or whether it's ethicists, we don't fall into some sort of trap of determinism. This is not something about the future of work that is coming to happen to us. This is very much shaped by our choices. Yes, there are stories, for example, of warehouse sackings in the United States, where local management says, we didn't understand the algorithm or we had no control over it. But that does not mean at the same time that nobody understands the algorithm and that nobody has any understanding of it. Because exactly as Joanna says, somebody somewhere made that choice. So one thing that I'm hoping to explore in my European Research Council funded project, for example, is how we can empower humans when they have that place of being the human in the loop. Right? How do we think, for example, about a workplace where you have sophisticated algorithmic systems that help with the selection of candidates for interviews, or potentially help with future job developments or indeed terminations? How do we train and empower the human who sits there and ultimately has to make the decision? What does she need to be able to be in a position to use the information provided by the algorithm in a responsible, in a legal, in an ethical way? And I think that's a much harder, but ultimately a much more important and I think much more rewarding question for us to think about than saying, should we ever let an algorithm sack people? The answer to that, no, and it's illegal.
Sure, and it has happened with legal consequences in Europe very recently. And it raises the important question of liability around artificial intelligence, which I'm going to ask you about, Joanna. I think one of the most obvious examples that could pop to mind with this is, say, an autonomous car that was driving via an algorithm crashed. Who is liable for the car crashing? And I'm sure there's loads more examples that we can apply this to, but who is responsible for algorithmic mistakes?
Right. So that's a really excellent question. And I want to actually, for the first time, slightly disagree with something Jeremiah said, which is that it isn't always true that somebody knows how an algorithm worked. However, it is always true that somebody should have known. And so it is possible for companies to deliberately obscure so that for example, that they could hire somebody and say, we don't want to know how it works. We just want to make sure that we don't have to spend as much tax money or something. And so it is always possible to throw away the information. And so one of the really important things about liability is to come in and say, if you can't demonstrate that you've done the right thing, and that goes back to the transparency thing again, right? You need to keep the logs, to keep immutable logs so that we know that this is exactly why you designed the system the way you designed it. And this is already happening. So you mentioned before, Tim, that we're in this Wild West. The Wild West is actually the new sectors, like social media. They're being under-regulated. Again, like what Jeremiah said, maybe we'll re-regulate them like conventional media, who knows? But right now they're under-regulated. But the automotive sector actually is well-regulated. And there's already been cases where people have been killed in car crashes by algorithms. So somebody had a stroke, and unfortunately, he had a stroke with his hand still on the steering wheel and his eyes open. So the car thought he was still awake. The main thing cars are looking for is, have you fallen asleep right now? So then it kept driving in cruise control mode, and it unfortunately killed a family. And so they went and they were able to show the car company involved that they had done due diligence, that nobody had thought of the possibility of a stroke that forced you to hold your hands like that. And so that was reasonable action at that time. In the future, it is no longer a reasonable action. So that's a mistake that we now can recognize and we have to defend against. So liability is exactly where it always was. If you as the owner operator did something wrong, it's your fault. If it's because the system failed, then it's the manufacturer's fault. And if they can't defend themselves and demonstrate that it's not their fault, then they have to be held liable.
Brilliant. And we're just running out of time and coming to the end of this discussion, but I want to give you both one quick question to end, which is, we've talked about regulation, but how much should private companies be self-regulating, and how should that work in combination with government regulation? I'll go to Joanna first.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm sure the lawyer will have a great answer, but I feel this is a false dichotomy. It's absolutely essential. Every company has to self-regulate. That every organism regulates. Every cell breathes, right? That's what we all have to do. And the better they self-regulate, the more easy it is for us to coordinate at the top. But there are some things that are so much easier to use government to do, for example, the enforcement. So it's not an either or. It's that both have to happen, and that we need to work together to make the system work the best we can. We need to protect society, otherwise there are no companies. There's nothing for the digital to be sold to.
And Jeremiah, your thoughts on that issue of self-regulation?
I completely agree with Joanna that we can't fall into this false dichotomy, right? And indeed, the state can play an important role to actually create legally binding or supported structures for self-regulation. So perhaps the single most successful way I've seen of regulating the introduction of algorithms at work is actually through social dialogue between representatives of management and labor. Right? So German law, for example, is very advanced in this through the notion of works councils. We have meetings and discussions between representatives of management, representatives of workers, and before any new technology is introduced, they need to sit down and discuss the introduction of that technology. And what ends up happening when you look at the evidence is that everybody wins. The workers have a veto power, so they can say, well, there's certain particularly creepy features, like being surveyed on the bathroom, that we simply don't want to have. But management also wins, because at the end of the day, for the successful implementation of these technologies, you need employee buy-in. You need to be able to convince your employees that they can trust the system and that actually there is a working relationship between management and labor. And so creating an environment in which a state supports that kind of self-regulation, I think, is hugely important.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much to you both. I think it's really good to end on that optimistic note that there are examples of how this has worked, and also to kind of debunk some of the common misconceptions of scaremongering around artificial intelligence and the future of platform work. So thank you both so much. And yeah, we're now going to move on to our next session, I believe. Well, now let's move on to the next session, and we're now going to focus on digital transformation here in Spain. Technology clearly has a big role to play, both in creating new digital industries, but also in modernizing those sectors of the economy that have been really important here in Spain, such as telecoms and finance. we're also living in a time where large resources are being made available at EU level to accelerate digital transitions as we think about the recovery from the pandemic. And I'm really pleased to say that we're joined by Belén Romana, economist and board member of Banco Santander, Aviva, and the Digital Future Society. And we also have Marta Garcia-Ayer, journalist at El Confidencial, collaborator on De Cero and La Sexta, and she's also an associate professor at IE Business School and ICADE. Welcome to you both, and I'm going to ask one question to each of you, but I'm going to start with Belén. 2020 has been such a disruptive year in so many ways, but how do you think this year of the pandemic has affected digital transition, both globally and here in Spain?
So this has been a really difficult period for all of us, and I think it has made clear that we're living in a completely different world. Many of the transformations were already there, but probably were not that clear for most of us. But things were already changing before the pandemic started. Just a few examples. One is the unwinding of globalization, so the evolution of trade was coming down for a number of years. It's also the case that we are seeing the rise of a real world of oligopolies. From the geopolitical point of view, we see the rise of China and how it's seeing eye to eye with the US and how that's changing the political and geopolitical landscape we are living in, but also from the point of view of the business world, we see how the large tech companies have become even larger, real giants with a power on many areas of our lives and economies. So those things were already there, but I think that now we see very clear, and we need to think about that.
Marta, let me get your view on that as well. And Belén mentioned the impact of the centralization of power when it comes to technology in the US and China and those big tech companies. What role can Europe play and Spain within that?
Well, definitely the European Union will have to play a major role to deal with the challenges, the great challenges we have ahead to recover from the pandemic. But Spain will also have an opportunity to take advantage of this change. We've been listening for years, for decades, that it's time to change the way this country works, the economy, to make it better, to make it more digital, to drive it to the future. Well, now we have a moment crucial for it, because digitalization, as Belén was saying, has accelerated many changes that were already here, but we weren't seeing, or we weren't making the most of it. Many industries, many companies have responded to the outbreak of the pandemic with impressive agility. Workers have adapted to these new working methods with video conferencing from the kitchen. We've seen how resilient and how adaptive people and companies are. Therefore, countries, political organizations need to adapt too, probably quicker than we're seeing.
And Belén, I'll bring you in on that. What do you think? We've obviously had to adapt so much, as Marta points out, but as we move hopefully towards the end of the pandemic, what do you think the opportunities are? What have we learned in terms of digital transition that can help build a fairer, better technological future?
So I think that we have really seen that we can do things that we never thought. We can think of different ways of working. So this working from home that we could do, but we just weren't aware of that. That brings a whole new range of opportunities. I think talent has become global, and that is a huge opportunity for the Spanish economy as a whole, and understanding how we can make that work for people. And also, we've been talking for years about how to conciliate. And I think that we have seen that there are many ways to make work life more flexible and help people deal better with their their lives. That I think is a huge change. And I think that quite clearly people are thinking of work in a completely different way. And companies are also thinking about that. And we need to think of how get the balance right. We are in an extreme situation coming from another extreme situation. We see advantages and disadvantages. The lack of human interaction is also having an impact in people's lives and companies. So that's one opportunity and a challenge at the same time. But also the fact that we have found Spain was lagging behind in terms of e-commerce, for example, for many years. Now we all have seen that that is something we can do. We have the infrastructure, we have the skills, and we can do that. So we are seeing both companies and people adapting to that. I think that brings us it's a leap forward that we were needing, and for the wrong reasons we got.
Yeah, thank you, Belen. And I'm going to bring you in on one point on that, Marta. Belen mentioned the issue of talent and the fact that we're going to be living in a more global distributed workforce. What opportunities could that bring? And also opportunities around next generation EU funding. Well, Spain is probably due to get more of that than its Northern European neighbours. How can Spain really put itself at the forefront of this recovery?
Well, definitely, Belen mentioned one of the key points for the future of work, and it's flexibility. That it's something that is not only in the digital tools we use. The flexibility needs to be also in the culture, in the minds of people, to avoid having presentialism becoming telepresentialism. That wouldn't solve anything. If we have people present for 10 hours in front of a computer just in case their bosses show up, doesn't matter if we're not all together in an office. That would be a problem from the past, from a 20th century mentality. And definitely Spain has, as you were saying, a great opportunity for being one of the places in the world where people really love to come, visit, and live here. And working remotely, increases the possibility for people working for the rest of the world, but working from here. Greece is one of the countries that is leading this transformation. So in the Mediterranean, there are competitors with Spain that are already trying that. And we don't not only need technology to make that possible. First of all, we need to control the pandemic. And okay, I don't know if we are at the end of it or at the beginning of the end, but it's a great challenge we have ahead in the 2021st, vaccines and so on. And technology and digital technology will play a major role to adapt to the new field, but also to reassure people that the people who come here, they can feel safe. And that's something we all hope happens within this year.
Belen, what's your view on that? Marta points out that it's not only going to be Spain that is competing for this global talent that might become more available as workforces get more distributed. How can Spain and policymakers and also private businesses make the Spanish economy one that thrives after the pandemic?
I think I completely agree with what Marta pointed out. I think that Spain is a very attractive country to live in, and that's generally the case. So many people think that it's nice, it's secure, it is really developed in terms of infrastructures, it has connections, physical, logical, and technological, and it's a very good bridge to Latin America, for example. If you think of the timing, we live in a situation where we can be a good bridge between Eastern Europe and Latin America. So I think that we do have many of the features that we need, but then we need to be much more flexible in so many ways. We need to have more flexible, for example, universities and training centers where we can attract people from other places with completely different backgrounds, and not they should not need to be forced to pick into a very rigid mold, I would say, but also the Spanish companies need to be really flexible and understand that, especially the younger people and people with technological background, they have a completely different understanding of work, and flexibility for them is key. So we cannot apply industrial approaches, meaning from the regulation point of view or from the economy or from the company's point of view, to deal with the type of job that's completely different. The organization is different. The needs are different. So we need to understand that this is not the industrial world and treat it like that, and not, the presence and things like that are not the key. And you have other ways to help people work within an organization. So let's use them.
And Marta, if you could choose one thing that Spain needs to do to stay ahead of this recovery and this digital transition, what would the one thing be?
It's very hard. There are a lot of work to do, not only in Spain, in the world, basically, because there is a kind of hype with the digitalization. We've, in a very quick way, suddenly seen the transformation, the digital transformation into in telemedicine, in finance, of course, but also in food, in the bakery on the corner of the street. In Spain, one of the biggest challenge, I don't know if the biggest, but we have very small companies. We don't have enough companies with a size over 100 employees, as for example, Germany would be the place that make us being less productive, and it's a shame. So one of the things that Spain really need to improve, small companies need to improve, is this digitalization, not being only in the multinationals that of course are in the Premier League, but also the small companies competing there. And trusting technology, because I think that is one of the major changes we've seen in the last months, how small businesses that thought digitalization was not their thing have realized that they can increase productivity. They needed to deal with people, with the management, with the remote working, and of course remote working from home can magnify management problems. And there are a lot of work to do there. We are learning the limits of the working from home, and to what extent we can avoid going to the office or going to the headquarters. We probably will see in the future smaller headquarters, but the small companies do not have headquarters. They just have a little office where everybody goes and live there. So I think major challenges for small companies to adapt and be able to compete in a global world.
And Marta, you mentioned the theme that smaller companies need to trust in technology. But what do you think the role is of organisations like the Digital Future Society in terms of promoting this debate and working towards a discourse around a more fair, responsible technological future?
I think it's key. I think that think tanks and organisations like the Digital Future Society they play a key role, because we need to understand that technology is a tool, is not the end, it's just a tool. And we need to understand how it works, the positive and negative impact, and understand that things that happen in the real world, in the physical world, can also happen in the digital world. And even then, the framework is completely different, the regulation is completely different. And sometimes the rights are completely different. So things like the digital rights for citizens are key, and the debate around the limits of the impact of technology and how to defend the right of the people are key. And I think that's the kind of thing that we have to keep on debating.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much. And we're going to be back in just a couple of seconds. Stay with us here at the Digital Future Society. So we're now moving on to our final discussion session, and this time looking at the theme of high-performance computing. Computing clearly has huge impacts on the way we process big data and how we can make big data work for all in this age where so much of our information is generated and stored online. And we're lucky to be joined by Matteo Ballero, Director of the Barcelona Supercomputing Centre, and also by Robin Waters, founder of Tech.eu, a journalist, analyst, speaker, and curator of events, and also founder of Startup Europe Lens and B Central. They're also both co-authors of the chapter of the Digital Future Society's book, looking at the role of supercomputers, titled Climbing to the Top, Why the Future Generation of Supercomputers Will Need to be Built with Open Hardware and Software. And I'm going to start with you, Matteo, just for a quick definition for those who aren't experts on supercomputing. What makes a computer super?
Super means the faster one. And how much faster? So they pass a test, and the 500 who pass the test in less time, they are considered supercomputer. How we build this machine? Just putting millions of processors working together, okay, with a huge memory, plus an interconnection network that allow them to interchange bits very quickly. 100 with less latency than the 5G, 100 times the bandwidth, okay? So this is what a supercomputer is built, how the supercomputer is built.
And Robin, is there anything you'd like to add about, how you see the role of supercomputers and also what some of their applications can be?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, Mr. Valero is the expert here, but from my understanding, the reason why you want a supercomputer is the same reason why you as an individual want a better computer or a better smartphone. It's because it's more powerful and it can do more things, right? And for nation states and researcher, that means, better resources for things like climate change modeling, for researching vaccines, for example, which is quite relevant in this COVID-19 times. Nations can also use it for military purposes, whether for defensive or offensive reasons. But there's so many things that you can use supercomputers for that it's almost impossible to list all of them. But what is crucial to understand is that it's very important to have powerful computers to do the things that normal computers cannot do. Develop new drugs, make advances in transportation, manufacturing technology, weather forecasting, for example. There's tons of reasons out there, but yeah, we need them.
Matteo, I'll come back to you because, as Robin says, there are almost countless ways you could apply supercomputing. Just give some examples of how Barcelona Supercomputing Centre is prioritizing its work, and how do those decisions get made about what is given time in the supercomputer?
Okay, so let me tell you, just to put an example related with the virus, okay? So we were doing some research, mainly directed to the cancer, and then we changed the target quickly because in many kinds of vaccines, not in all of them, but you need to deal with a huge quantity of data to do a lot of operation. The same for what we are doing, just analyzing radiographies, TAC, with the deep learning algorithms, also the medical records, also all the literature, all the cases worldwide. So we use natural language. So in this case, one more, the supercomputer is an instrument at the service of the doctors for helping them to analyze a huge quantity of data, trying to put all the knowledge together and telling to the doctor, listen, we see that, you take the decision, okay? So this is one of the applications we did. And let me tell you that we have now a unique opportunity worldwide, but in Europe, and we are starting in Spain, but in collaboration with European, that there is a unique opportunity now, just to bring all this data who are at the hospital, to put all this data together and allow to the researchers to use this data to advance the future, to predict the future, okay? And this is one of the good challenges that we have in mind at the BSC, but not just BSC, we are just a small piece of Europe, a small piece of the worldwide. The research should be collaborative research because the problem is for all of us. So we need to collaborate, all of us, trying to help in the solution of the problem.
And you raised the important issue of cooperation, and it's perhaps one of the lessons we've learned from this pandemic, that we are a global society, but we might not be a global society of supercomputing organizations. So I'll ask you, Robin, how do you see global leadership in this field? Is it another example of America and China kind of fighting it out for supremacy and Europe being stuck in an awkward place in the middle?
It's a bit of an interesting question because, of course, it touches many aspects. You want to have supercomputers that deliver, constant advancement. So you need collaboration. And within the research community and the scientific community, it's very difficult to pinpoint any borders on a geographical level because there's research being done, on a worldwide scale. But the reality is that if you are a country and you want to have the fastest, most powerful computer, for military reasons, for example, or for defense or other purposes, then you might not want to share some of the technology, or you might not want to share some of the advances you make on the level of software and hardware with the rest of the world. So there is a constant dynamic of both geopolitical differences and the research community that are sort of in a tug of war, so to speak.
Matteo, that's an interesting point that Robin raises about
Can I say something about that? Yes, I agree with you, Robin. But let me tell you, the reality now is in Europe, we are users of the supercomputer. We buy the supercomputer, okay? And this is not good. So let me tell you that 25 years ago, when the computer we built, even the software were private, and the hardware also. So the Linux is a European invention, democratized the software development. So more or less, everybody can collaborate developing software that will be executed in any platform. But what happened with the hardware? The hardware is mainly owned by the American. And now the fastest supercomputer is in Japan. So in Europe, we don't have processor. And how we can build an IT ecosystem without having the most important ingredient in the paella that you see. Without rice, you don't have paella, okay? There are many ingredients, but without processor, you are lost, okay? So we need to finish with this. This is one of the grand challenges Europe has, to develop processor, not just for building supercomputer, just for maintaining the car manufacturing, the future autonomous car. The most important part will be the battery, probably, and the informatic, the hardware and the software inside the 5G, okay? We need to produce this kind of processor, because if not, something bad can happen to the European industry. And just talking about the internet, how you can put your ethics feeling in internet if you don't control the technology? Are the guys who are designing the things, who are putting inside the rules, they think about the ethical behavior, okay? So we need in Europe to develop a very strong program, and BSC is behind that, building processor, because the one we have that conquered the world, ARM, was sold to the Japanese, and now, as you know, is NVIDIA from the state who is buying ARM, so they will a monopoly, terrible monopoly that can cause serious problem to any country as Europe. For me, I consider Europe, not just Spain or Catalonia. I am talking about Europe.
Robin, I'll bring you in on that. Do you agree that there's a sort of existential crisis around processing within Europe in terms of control of computing power?
In the context of the book, I had a really good conversation with Mr. Valero about this, and I very much agree. Europe is really playing catch-up. You can see that in the numbers as well. If you look at just the sheer amount of supercomputers that are in this top 500 that Mr. Valero mentioned, most of these are Chinese-made, and the fastest ones are usually in the US or Japan at the moment is the number one. So Europe seems to be playing catch-up, and the reason for that is both historical and both the way that Europe simply works. But there is a way for us to sort of play a role globally. And as Mr. Valero mentioned, the way that you can do that is by collaborating with each other, but also taking very, very good care of, being mindful about the fact that we don't own most of the technology that is involved with supercomputing today. We don't own it. So we need to take steps to ensure that we can play a role when it comes to the microprocessor, but also on the hardware and the software level in the future, because the race is on, and it's a very, very global one, and it's a very crucial one.
Yes, we need to change from one B to another B, just from buy to build. Okay, that made the difference. Okay, so you see the list. Even we have some of them in Europe, but all this machine has been produced outside. Okay, all the main components are outside. Even we don't have any foundry, and this is very important for the future IT ecosystem in Europe. Europe should have a foundry. We cannot depend on the Taiwan or South Korea or American. What happened now with the lack of chips for the cars? I mean, we need to maintain some strategic technology, but being collaborative with any. We should open collaborating, but we should protect a little ourselves.
Maybe one final note is that national governments and the European institutions are very well aware of this problem. So I expect lots of billions to flow into this area, hopefully very soon. But the reality is also that the private sector will also need to play a role in collaborating with public institutions and research institutions to advance.
Yes, I agree with you. The only problem I have is that I am very old. But finally, I think we are going to get, I mean, because the Euro SPC was a very good idea, 5 countries, 3 years ago. Now, all European countries, some additional countries, with 2 targets. One of them is try to acquire the fastest supercomputer in the world, just to allow to our researchers, to our company, to do a better job. But the second thing, as important, and for me, more important than the first one, is to develop European technology in order not to be dependent on the non-European processor, because we don't have processor. How we can build again an IT environment without having processor is almost impossible.
And I want to we're coming towards the end of the session, but I want to go back to some of the reasons we should really care about this. What are the opportunities and applications for supercomputing beyond? We've already mentioned medical research, but let's think about some of the other areas where data is changing the way we live our lives. For instance, in cities, smart cities generate huge amounts of data. What are areas where supercomputers can play a role that can really advance society? I'll come to you first, Robin.
Yeah, I'll let Mr. Valero sort of compliment me, but for the research that we've done, most of the things that we've identified is things like modeling climate change and weather forecasting, which is an enormous impact on global economies and society, so it's very important. The development of new drugs and vaccines, of course, but as you mentioned, cities are changing as well, so how do you advance transportation, manufacturing, delivery of goods, oil and gas exploration, which we need to power our cities and our vehicles. But it also, other examples include molecular chemistry, which is sort of related to drugs, but can have multiple use cases as well. Financial trading, quantum mechanics. So the possibilities for supercomputers to really advance in those fields are endless, I would say.
And I'll come back to you, Matteo. What is most exciting for you in the way that supercomputing can be applied as we look forward?
Applied to many fields, because as you know, the supercomputer is just a general purpose instrument, and anytime the humanity discover an instrument, the science and the general advance. This is a general purpose instrument. Depending on the software the supercomputer are executing, you can be the supercomputer can be a microscope, a telescope, whatever. Okay. So all the topics that Robin mentioned, I agree with him. For me, obviously, if I need to choose one, is the personalized medicine, to create the digital twin in medicine, because the computer can deal with a huge quantity of experience, a huge quantity of data, and even the best doctors who are very, very, very good don't have his huge memory, don't have his huge capacity of associating things. Okay, so we are very directed, the BSc mainly in 3 topics that Robin mentioned: personalized medicine, the medicine of the future, the digital twin, climate change, and all the search for green energy. Okay, these are very important, But these are the topic I have 725 people here, but we are using 10% just of the Mare Nostrum. The 90% of the time is used for many European researchers in many fields.
And on a very, very quick note to end, because I know we only have 1 minute left, but supercomputing can also be used for bad purposes. So you can use it to break codes, for example, encryptions. So it can be used for bad purposes, like any instrument can be used for good or bad. So it's also important to take note of that.
Okay, Robin, Matteo, thank you so much for your time. And I think it touches on other themes from today that when you talk about supercomputing, you're not just talking about technology, you're talking about the humans around that technology, how it's used, the politics around that technology. And I think that's a brilliant note to end on with this discussion as we reflect on how supercomputing and big data are just inherent parts of this modern world. So thank you both very much for your time. And we're now going to move on to our closing speeches. And the first is from Carlos Grau, CEO of Mobile World Capital. So let me hand over to Carlos. Welcome.
Thank you, Tim. A real pleasure to be with all of you today. Very important day for our foundation, very important day for the growing Digital Future Society family. And good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this presentation. I will especially like to thank the presence and support of the third Vice President of the Government of Spain and Minister of Economy and Digital Transformation, Nadia Calvino, and the Secretary of State of Digital Transformation and the Artificial Intelligence, Carme Artigas. Also, a special thanks for the authors and experts of these books who have joined us today with a clear inspiration about the challenges we have in this digital environment and some of the keys to face them successfully. As we have shown today, we live in a digital age. From Mobile World Capital Barcelona, we work to promote the digital development of society with the aim of improving people's lives globally. At a time when technology is fully integrated in our lives, the boost of an initiative such as Digital Future Society is more relevant than ever in order to help us to contribute to build a more fair, inclusive, equitable and sustainable future. We must have in mind that digital transformation brings us amazing opportunities, flexibility from working from anywhere, amazing digital rich experiences and immersive experience, but also has risk to generate imbalances and inequalities. The digital revolution is leaving in some cases important sectors of the population behind. Therefore, we could claim that we are facing today a digital emergency, a situation caused by an asymmetric and accelerated digital transformation, a situation that requires a quick and coordinated action in order to guarantee equity, the protection of human and digital rights, and help us to reduce at the same time the impact on climate change. This digital emergency requires a coordinated effort and a big alliance. All of us have a role to play in order to solve it. Governments, corporations, academia, and the civil society across the world must be aware of this digital emergency and take joint actions before the consequences are irreversible. The Digital Future Society book that we present today shows the light in the middle of a challenging global pandemic. The COVID-19 situation has revealed us that digitalization and innovation, and more precisely, emerging and disruptive technology, could become the most effective response for the pandemic. And this book, Faster Than Future, Facing the Digital Age, it's a fruit of a deep analysis from different disciplines of the role of technological revolution in a situation of extreme crisis. From Mobile World Capital Barcelona and Digital Future Society team, we focus on those challenges that we consider need to be addressed as a priority, on which we can influence. We have the aspiration that the public-private partnership of our foundation could contribute to provide solutions to this digital emergency, and we will do our best in this space. Among the current social and economic challenges, it is necessary to reduce the digital divide, even present today in the most digitized and advanced territories of our planet. It's a complex issue that involves aspects such as access, usage, impact, and unequal knowledge of technology by different groups, especially those most vulnerable. The future of the current global labor of digital platform is another fundamental challenge. Jobs have changed, but in most cases, labor laws, plans for social protection, and legal frameworks have not been adapted at the same speed. And this is today a big priority. We cannot forget the impact of climate change. It is essential to maximize the positive impact of technology, reducing energy consumption, waste and emission that are global problems that require cost-cutting approaches. Finally, rapid technological development raises the ethical dilemma, the use of data and algorithms. While there is no doubt that data is an asset today, the threat of loss of privacy highlights the need for a greater transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness. To face this digital emergency, solutions must be multidisciplinary and transversal approaches. They must go through strengthening societies and empowerment of citizens. Cooperation and collaboration between all stakeholders are the best to face the complexity of digital emergency challenges. This involves the public sector, the private sector, and the civil society. Promoting global agreements and international governance systems that define basic frameworks, rights, and protections will be critical. Technology can and must be a fundamental tool for change, to reduce inequities and make the digital age inclusive. With everyone's efforts, we will do our best to make it for sure. We hope you will enjoy some of the actions suggested to solve the challenges in this digital age by reading the book. And again, thanks very much for sharing the journey with us. And Tim, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much, Carlos, for that. And again, we're just going to see you in a couple of seconds, so stay with the Digital Future Society. Thanks for staying with us. And to end today's event, we're now going to hear from Nadia Calvino, third Vice President of the Government of Spain and Minister for Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation. So Nadia, I'm going to pass over to you to make your address.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and good afternoon to you all. It's really a great pleasure to be able to participate and share with you some thoughts as closing remarks for this very important event for all of us, and that's the presentation of the book Faster Than the Future, Facing the Digital Age. I'm sure that debates this morning, unfortunately, I couldn't attend them, but I'm sure that they have been extremely interesting. And since it's already late, I'm going to just share with you three key reflections to explain the interest and the support that the government of Spain is providing to all these debates having to do with rights in the new digital world, in the new digital reality. So first of all, for decades, for the last 20 years, the digital agenda in Spain has been mainly driven by investment in infrastructures. And that has led the country to be one of the leading in Europe and even in the world in terms of broadband deployment. Thanks to the public and private investment, Spain is the country which has more broadband than the addition of Germany, France, Italy, and the UK. And this is proving to be very important for the next steps in terms of technological development. But when we look at the different indicators, we see that Spain was not so advanced in other areas. For example, digital skills, for example, SME digitalization. And we were planning to invest in these areas and to move ahead in these areas when the pandemic hit and accelerated dramatically all these processes. I think that this pandemic has brought to the forefront our strengths, the importance of connectivity and infrastructures, for example, but also those areas which are most challenging and we need to make more progress in the coming years. And that is why we have decided to devote 1/3 of the investment foreseen in the Spanish recovery plan to digitalization. And we have published a new digital agenda, the agenda Digital Spain 2025, and we have published 6 specific plans to give a clear guidance and a clear vision of where we want to be in 2025. These 6 plans are covering connectivity, 5G, artificial intelligence, the digitalization of SMEs, digital skills, and the digitalization of public administration. Now, this is a very clear vision, a very clear plan to which we're going to devote a high volume of investments, more than 20 billion euros in the coming couple of years. But this needs to be accompanied, and this is my second point, with a very strong in-depth reflection on how to ensure that this digitalization process is responding to our values, to our constitutional principles, to the protection of the rights, the individual and collective rights of citizens, that this digitalization process is used for the good of the whole of society, that this allows us to close the gender gap, that it also allows us to close the territorial and social gap, that all citizens are able to benefit from this process of digitalization, that this process does not lead to new biases, to new gaps being created in our societies, that we are building definitely a humanistic digitalization, that we are building a better future. And this brings me to my third point. That is why we have devoted so much attention and we're investing into the Digital Future Society program. That is why we're working on a charter of digital rights. We have subjected these to public consultation. We have convened a multidisciplinary group of experts to reflect on these issues. We have a first draft, which we will be working on, and we will try to bring it into the broader European and global debates that are taking place in the area of digital rights, because we are absolutely convinced that we need to ensure that those rights that we cherish and we protect in the analog, in the real world, are also protected appropriately in the new digital reality. And that brings me to the closure, which is to thank all of you wholeheartedly. First of all, Digital Future Society, obviously, for organizing the event and then the publication of the book. Secondly, to all those authors, many of which have participated today in the debate, that have contributed with their ideas, their reflections, their suggestions in this very interesting book. And thirdly, obviously, to all of you who are accompanying us today in the event and have participated in the debate, because I think that we absolutely need to bring together the brightest minds and the biggest hearts also, to make sure that we ensure that the process, which is definitely going to take place in the coming years and is going to be accelerated, and that we will be strongly supporting also from the public sector in Spain, is a process that delivers more opportunities from a personal and from a professional point of view to the future generations. So thank you very much. Congratulations for the interesting debates that have taken place. Congratulations to those that have contributed to the book. And I look forward to the future debates that will be organized by Digital Future Society around the Mobile World Congress meeting in Barcelona in the summer, maybe some other events before, other events in the fall, because this is a very important issue for us, one to which we want to devote our attention, and we want Spain to be one of the cores, one of the areas of the world that definitely plays a role in shaping the digital future.
Nadia, thank you so much for your time. It's great to reflect on some of the themes that we've covered across the debates today around responsibility, ethics, and how those relate to technological transformation. We're coming to the end of today's event now, and it's been fascinating to hear from experts at the cutting edge of this technological revolution and to hear how Spain and the rest of the world is equipped to deal with the challenges facing us. Thanks to everyone who's been watching and to all of the crew here who've made the event happen. We hope you've enjoyed the conversations around these topics featured in Digital Future Society's new book, Faster Than the Future, Facing the Digital Age. Remember, you can get the book through the banner that you'll see on the platform. Thanks again for watching, and goodbye.